What would you do if your maid of honor deliberately poured red wine on your wedding dress 10 minutes before walking down the aisle? For Isabella Martinez, this wasn't hypothetical. It was reality. When her childhood friend Vanessa deliberately sabotaged her $3,280 custom gown, most people would have melted into tears or exploded in rage. But our guest chose strategy instead. I'm Eliza, and today on Wedding Day Justice, we're exploring how Isabella transformed a dress disaster into a moment of public vindication that left her betrayer fleeing the reception. Sometimes the most satisfying justice isn't served immediately. It's carefully prepared and perfectly timed. Thank you, Eliza. I'm sharing this story because I want others to know that preparation and patience can turn even the most devastating betrayal into a moment of empowerment. What happened that day changed not just my wedding, but how I approach relationships forever. Let me tell you what happened. I never imagined my wedding day would become a masterclass in revenge, but when my childhood best friend deliberately ruined my handcrafted wedding dress, I had to choose between being a doormat or delivering justice. I chose the latter, and I have zero regrets. Vanessa and I had been inseparable since we were 5 years old. We promised to be each other's maids of honor, planned our weddings together as teenagers, and supported each other through college, career changes, and family tragedies. When Michael proposed to me after 6 years together, Vanessa was naturally the first person I called. She squealed with delight, demanded to see the ring immediately, and insisted on throwing my engagement party. But something changed when Michael and I actually started planning our wedding. It was subtle at first, little comments about my ideas being a bit much or questioning if certain traditions were really necessary. I initially chalked it up to wedding stress and Vanessa going through a tough breakup with her boyfriend of 3 years. I tried to be sensitive, even scaling back some of our wedding talk when we were together. I come from a mixed Spanish and Navajo heritage, and my wedding incorporated meaningful elements from both cultures. My grandmother had hand-beaded a traditional Navajo wedding blanket that took her over 8 months to complete. My mother had preserved her own wedding dress, a stunning vintage gown with delicate Spanish lace that had been in our family for generations. With some careful alterations by a specialized seamstress, we transformed it into my dream dress, adding elements that honored both sides of my heritage. Vanessa seemed genuinely excited when I asked her to be my maid of honor. She hosted a beautiful engagement party, organized my bridal shower, and helped me with countless wedding details. But as the wedding drew closer, her behavior became increasingly strange. She'd forget important tasks I'd assigned her, would make dismissive comments about my cultural traditions to the other bridesmaids, and seemed irritated whenever my wedding received attention. A month before the wedding, while helping Vanessa move into her new apartment, I discovered her diary while packing up her nightstand. I wasn't snooping. It fell open as I was wrapping it in tissue paper, and a specific entry caught my eye, my name, alongside words like always the center of attention and perfect little princess. I felt sick to my stomach, but quickly closed it and packed it away. I considered confronting her, but decided to wait until after the wedding. I didn't want to create drama or lose my maid of honor with just weeks to go. In retrospect, that was my first mistake. The week before my wedding was a whirlwind. My extended family had arrived from Spain and the Navajo Nation, the venue was being prepared, and final fittings were underway. Vanessa seemed to have returned to her normal self, efficiently handling last-minute details and keeping me calm. I started to think I'd misjudged her earlier behavior. 2 days before the wedding, we checked into our suite at the historic hotel where the ceremony would take place. My mother, grandmother, Vanessa, and my 3 other bridesmaids joined me for our traditional pre-wedding preparations. My grandmother performed a Navajo blessing, and my mother presented me with a family heirloom, a handcrafted silver and turquoise necklace that had been worn by the women in our family for 5 generations. That night, after a beautiful rehearsal dinner, we returned to the suite for some quiet time. My wedding dress hung in a special garment bag in the closet, and my mother had carefully arranged my accessories on the dresser. Vanessa suggested we have some wine to relax. She insisted on red wine, despite my preference for white, saying it would help me sleep better. I didn't think much of it then. The morning of my wedding, I woke to the sound of my mother's horrified gasp. I rushed to the closet to find her standing there, hands trembling, staring at my wedding dress. The garment bag had been unzipped, and there was a massive red wine stain spreading across the bodice and down the skirt. The delicate lace my great-grandmother had hand-tatted was saturated with wine, and the beadwork my grandmother had spent countless hours perfecting was ruined. I felt my knees buckle beneath me as I collapsed to the floor. The dress wasn't just fabric. It was my heritage, my family's history, irreplaceable pieces of artistry from the women who came before me. My grandmother knelt beside me, her weathered hands gripping mine as tears streamed down her face. "The spirits will guide us," she whispered, but I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. My mother called the hotel manager while my bridesmaids frantically tried to blot the stain, but it was hopeless. The red wine had set overnight, seeping deep into the vintage fabric. I noticed Vanessa standing back from the chaos, her expression a strange mixture of concern and something else, something that made my blood run cold. She was the only one who had stayed in the suite when the rest of us went for a late-night snack run. She was the one who had insisted on red wine. As I sat there, surrounded by the ruins of my family heirloom, a hotel security officer knocked on our door. He apologetically informed us that the security camera outside our suite had malfunctioned overnight. No footage was available. Vanessa immediately suggested that housekeeping must have entered and accidentally knocked over a wine glass, but I knew better. I had closed and locked that garment bag myself, and housekeeping wouldn't have accessed it. I looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and saw a flash of satisfaction in her eyes before she schooled her features back into a mask of concern. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my childhood best friend had deliberately destroyed my wedding dress. What she didn't know was that I had prepared for this possibility. After finding her diary and sensing her growing resentment, I'd had a backup dress made not as meaningful as my family heirloom, but beautiful nonetheless. I'd kept it at my sister's house, just in case. I also hadn't returned Vanessa's diary after the move. Something had told me to hold on to it, and now I was grateful for that instinct. "We need to call the wedding planner," I said calmly, surprising everyone in the room. "And Jess." Jess was our AV technician and photographer, and more importantly, she was fiercely loyal to me. "Mom, can you get my phone? I need to make some adjustments to the reception program." My wedding planner, Elena, arrived within 20 minutes, took one look at the ruined dress, and immediately went into crisis mode. "We have 180 guests arriving in 5 hours, $42,000 invested, and a string quartet that's already setting up," she said, tapping furiously on her tablet. "We need solutions, not tears." While my mother called my sister to bring the backup dress, I pulled Elena and Jess aside and quietly explained my suspicions about Vanessa. Jess's eyes widened. "I actually have proof," she whispered. She pulled out her camera and showed us a photo she'd taken late last night when she'd returned to the suite to pick up some equipment. In the background, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Vanessa carefully pouring red wine over my dress while everyone else was out of the room. "I didn't realize what I was seeing until now," Jess said, her voice shaking with anger. "I thought she was just putting away a bottle. The angle was weird, and I was focused on getting my lighting gear." Elena squeezed my hand. "What do you want to do?" I thought about confronting Vanessa immediately, about throwing her out of the wedding party and exposing her betrayal. But something stopped me. This was my wedding day, and I refused to let it be consumed by drama before it even began. Besides, I had a better idea. "Nothing," I said. "For now, we proceed as planned. Vanessa stays as maid of honor." Elena looked skeptical. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I replied. "But I need you to make one change to the reception program. Vanessa was scheduled to give the first toast. I want you to let her do that, but immediately afterward, I want to be given the microphone." I outlined my plan quickly. Jess would prepare the incriminating photo to be projected during the reception. Elena would ensure the diary was accessible when needed. And my grandmother, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped forward with a small leather pouch. "For justice," she said simply, pressing it into my palm. Inside was a small vial of red ochre, sacred Navajo pigment used in protection ceremonies. I felt strength flow through me as I clutched it. My sister arrived with the backup dress, a modern design with subtle nods to my heritage in its beading pattern. It wasn't the dress of my dreams, but as my grandmother helped me into it, she whispered ancient prayers of protection and strength. My mother fastened the family necklace around my throat, and I felt the weight of 5 generations of women who had faced adversity with grace and resilience. Throughout the preparations, Vanessa played her role perfectly, helping with my hair, adjusting my veil, expressing performative outrage about the mysterious wine stain. I smiled and thanked her, letting her believe her sabotage had succeeded in nothing more than forcing a dress change. The ceremony itself was beautiful beyond words. Michael's face when he saw me walking down the aisle, even in my backup dress, made everything else fade away. We exchanged vows beneath an arch adorned with wildflowers from my grandmother's garden. The traditional Navajo blanket was wrapped around our shoulders as we spoke promises in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Dene Bizad. When Michael kissed me, 180 guests erupted in cheers. For those sacred moments, I forgot about Vanessa's betrayal. I was marrying the love of my life, surrounded by true family and friends. The reception, however, would be another story entirely. Our reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, transformed by thousands of fairy lights and arrangements of desert wildflowers. The cocktail hour went smoothly, with Vanessa playing the perfect maid of honor, organizing the photo line, directing guests, and keeping my champagne glass filled. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought she was genuinely happy for me. As dinner concluded, Alina signaled that it was time for toasts. The DJ introduced Vanessa, and she stood gracefully, champagne flute in hand. The room quieted as she tapped her glass. "I've known Bella since we were 5 years old," she began, her voice melodic and controlled. "We've shared everything, secrets, dreams, clothes." She paused for appreciative laughter. "When she met Michael 6 years ago, I knew he was the one for her. They complement each other perfectly. His steadiness balances her flair for the dramatic." I felt Michael's hand tighten around mine at the subtle dig, but I squeezed back reassuringly. "Let her have this moment." "Bella has always been the center of attention," Vanessa continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect friend, and now the perfect bride. Some people might find that intimidating, but not me. I've always been happy to stand in her shadow, supporting her dreams." The undercurrent of resentment was clear to me, but probably invisible to most guests. She raised her glass. "To Bella and Michael, may your marriage be as flawless as Bella always is." Guests applauded politely as Vanessa sat down, looking satisfied. The DJ then announced, "And now, a special toast from the bride herself." Vanessa's head snapped up in surprise. This wasn't on the program she'd reviewed. I stood slowly, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Alina slipped Vanessa's diary into my hand as I walked to the microphone. Jess gave me a subtle thumbs up from the AV booth. "Thank you all for sharing this special day with us," I began. "Marriage is built on honesty, loyalty, and trust, values I've always cherished in all my relationships." I looked directly at Vanessa, whose smile had frozen on her face. Vanessa mentioned we've shared everything since childhood. That's true in many ways. We've shared joys and sorrows, successes and failures. But there's one thing I didn't know we shared until recently, her deep resentment of me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face drained of color. "I'd like to read something if you'll indulge me." I opened the diary to the marked page. April 15th. "Bella's wedding is all anyone can talk about. Her perfect dress, her perfect venue, her perfect fiancé. I'm sick of living in her shadow. Everyone thinks she's so special with her cultural heritage and family heirlooms. I can't wait for this wedding to be over. Maybe something will go wrong and she'll finally know what it feels like to have things not go her way for once." The room had gone completely silent. I turned the page. June 8th, 2 days ago. I'm writing this after everyone went for snacks. I did it. I finally did something about perfect Bella, that precious family dress she wouldn't shut up about. Let's see how it looks with a bottle of Merlot soaked into it. I made sure to get the beadwork her grandmother spent countless hours on. Maybe now she'll understand what it feels like to have something you care about ruined. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's my private property," she hissed. "You had no right." "Jess, could you help me with something?" I interrupted calmly. On cue, the large projection screen behind me illuminated with the photo Jess had captured. Vanessa clearly pouring wine over my wedding dress, her face set in a look of cold determination. "I didn't just find your diary, Vanessa. You were seen," I said quietly. "The dress you ruined wasn't just fabric. It was my great-grandmother's handmade Spanish lace. It was my grandmother's beadwork, representing her Navajo heritage. It was hours of love and tradition and history that you deliberately destroyed out of jealousy." Vanessa's face contorted with rage and embarrassment. "You always get everything," she shouted, abandoning any pretense of innocence. "The perfect family, the perfect wedding, the perfect life. What about me? When is it my turn?" My mother stood up from her table. "Vanessa, that dress survived a civil war in Spain. It survived my immigration to this country with nothing but a suitcase. It survived because women in our family protected it, valued it, cherished it. And you destroyed it because of petty jealousy." My grandmother, dignified in her traditional Navajo attire, simply looked at Vanessa with such profound disappointment that several guests visibly winced. Vanessa looked around wildly, finding no allies in the shocked faces surrounding her. Michael's best man, a security professional, had quietly positioned himself near her, anticipating her next move. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said, my voice steady. "The damage you've done can't be undone, but neither will it define this day." Security approached as Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. She paused at the door, turning back as if to deliver one final blow, but the unified stares of 180 guests silenced whatever she might have said. The door closed behind her with a decisive click. I took a deep breath and turned back to our guests. "Well, that was unexpected," I said, drawing surprised laughter. "But if there's one thing my family has taught me, it's that we don't let darkness overshadow joy." I raised my glass. To all of you, our true friends and family, who understand that love and loyalty aren't just words but actions. And to my husband, Michael, who has shown me what real partnership looks like. Michael stood and joined me at the microphone, wrapping his arm around my waist. "And to my incredible wife," he added, "who just demonstrated the perfect blend of grace and backbone that made me fall in love with her in the first place." The room erupted in applause. My grandmother approached with the Navajo wedding blanket that had been used in our ceremony, draping it around both our shoulders. "This is how we respond to those who wish us harm," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We stand stronger, we hold tighter to tradition, and we celebrate louder." Elena signaled the band, who immediately launched into our first dance song. Michael led me to the dance floor, and as we swayed together, he whispered, "That was both terrifying and the sexiest thing I've ever seen." I laughed against his shoulder. I couldn't let her win, not today, not ever. "I'm sorry about your family dress," he said softly. "I am too," I admitted. "But my grandmother said something important this morning. The dress isn't the heritage. We are. The traditions, the stories, the resilience, that's what we carry forward." As our dance ended, my father cut in, tears in his eyes. "Your mother and I couldn't be prouder," he said, his accent thickening with emotion. "You stood up not just for yourself, but for 5 generations of women who sacrificed to give you this day." The celebration that followed was cathartic and joyous. My bridesmaids, relieved of Vanessa's toxic presence, confessed they'd noticed her sabotaging small details for weeks, accidentally giving the wrong directions to vendors, telling the florist I'd changed my mind about arrangements, even spreading rumors that Michael and I were fighting about the wedding. Jess approached during the cake cutting. "I've deleted that photo from the screens, but I've saved it to a private folder for you," she said, "just in case she tries to deny what happened later." "Thank you," I said, hugging her. "Not just for that, but for noticing what was happening when no one else did." "Some people can't stand to see others happy," she replied simply. "But look around," she failed spectacularly. And she was right. The dance floor was packed, the celebration uninhibited. My Spanish cousins were teaching my husband's college friends traditional dances. My Navajo relatives were sharing stories with Michael's Jewish family, finding surprising commonalities in their traditions. The wedding cake, a stunning creation incorporating design elements from both our heritages, was being served to appreciative guests. My mother found me by the dessert table. "I've been thinking," she said, taking my hand. Perhaps it's time to create a new tradition. Your dress may be ruined, but we could salvage some of the lace, some of the beadwork. Create something new for your daughter someday, a christening gown, perhaps, or a wedding veil. Something that carries the old stories but begins a new chapter. Tears welled in my eyes as I hugged her. I'd like that very much. As the night progressed, guests approached to express their support. Michael's grandmother, a Holocaust survivor, pressed something into my palm, a small silver charm. "For protection against the evil eye," she whispered. "Some friendships are not meant to survive, but you will." By the time we made our grand exit under an arch of sparklers, I realized something profound had happened. What Vanessa had intended as devastating sabotage had instead become a powerful moment of family unity, a demonstration of resilience that our future children would hear about for years to come. In our honeymoon suite, surrounded by rose petals and champagne, Michael helped me out of my backup dress. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I'm almost grateful to Vanessa." I raised an eyebrow. Grateful? If she hadn't shown her true colors today, she might have remained in our lives for years, causing smaller hurts, undermining our happiness in ways we might not have recognized until real damage was done. He kissed my forehead. Instead, she's gone, and we start our marriage with absolute clarity about who our real friends are. I realized he was right. The dress was gone, but what remained was infinitely more valuable. The unshakable knowledge that we were surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our joy, who would stand with us through whatever challenges life might bring. I haven't heard from Vanessa since that night. Mutual friends tell me she's moved to another state, claiming she was mistreated and that the photo was manipulated. Her diary mysteriously disappeared from my possession after the wedding, returned anonymously to her doorstep with a simple note. Some things should remain private. Others should not be written down at all. My grandmother's wisdom proved true. The spirits did guide us toward justice, toward truth, and ultimately, toward a stronger beginning than we could have imagined. And while I never expected my wedding to include such drama, I wouldn't change how it unfolded. Sometimes, the most powerful family traditions aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that emerge when we're tested. As for the backup dress, it's preserved in a special box alongside a small swatch of the original, a reminder that sometimes our second choices become our greatest blessings, and that true heritage isn't in the things we inherit, but in how we honor them when they're threatened. It's been 3 years since our wedding day, and the story of Vanessa and the wine-stained dress has become something of a legend in our family. My cousin even had custom wine stoppers made for her wedding that read, "No Vanessas allowed." A touch of humor that helped transform what could have been a purely painful memory into something we can now sometimes laugh about. Michael and I recently welcomed our daughter, Elena Sophia, named partly after our wedding planner who handled the crisis with such grace. My mother and grandmother have begun work on a special baptism gown incorporating salvaged lace from the ruined wedding dress, along with new elements that represent our growing family. The beadwork that was destroyed is being recreated, with my grandmother teaching me the traditional patterns and techniques so the knowledge continues through another generation. The experience taught me several valuable lessons that I've carried into my marriage and new motherhood. First, pay attention to the small signs. Vanessa's betrayal didn't happen overnight. There were countless warning signals I chose to ignore because confrontation felt too difficult. Those little moments of passive aggression, the subtle undermining comments, the flash of satisfaction at my moments of stress. They were all breadcrumbs leading to her ultimate act of sabotage. Now, I trust my instincts about people and address concerns directly before they fester. Second, preparation isn't paranoia. Some people criticized me for having a backup dress, saying it showed a lack of trust. But intuition is a gift, not a character flaw. Taking reasonable precautions against potential problems isn't pessimistic, it's prudent. We've applied this philosophy to our marriage by having difficult conversations early, creating contingency plans for major life decisions, and acknowledging potential challenges before they become crises. Third, justice doesn't have to be vengeful to be effective. I could have confronted Vanessa privately, thrown her out of the wedding immediately, or even pressed charges for property destruction. Instead, I chose a path that simply revealed the truth in her own words and actions. The natural consequences of her choices were punishment enough. This approach has served me well in other conflicts. Focusing on truth rather than retribution often leads to more meaningful resolution. Fourth, heritage is adaptive. What I initially saw as an irreplaceable loss, the family wedding dress, has evolved into something new but equally meaningful. Traditions matter not because they remain frozen in time, but because they evolve while carrying forward what's most essential. My daughter will never wear the dress I had planned to preserve for her, but she will have something crafted with even more intention and love, with a powerful story of resilience behind it. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, community is everything. The way our guests rallied around us, the way our families unified in the face of betrayal, the way true friends stepped forward to help without being asked, these were the real gifts of our wedding day. We've worked to nurture these relationships in the years since, prioritizing people who celebrate our joys without reservation and support us through difficulties without judgment. As for Vanessa, I occasionally hear updates through mutual acquaintances. She's apparently told a very different version of events, casting herself as the victim of my bridezilla behavior and unreasonable expectations. Some people believe her, and that's okay. Those who matter know the truth, and those who don't know the truth don't matter. Last month, I received a small package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm sorry," along with a donation receipt to a cultural preservation organization that works to protect indigenous textile traditions. The donation was made in my grandmother's name. I don't know if it was from Vanessa or someone else entirely, but I choose to see it as closure. My grandmother, now in her 80s, has a saying in Dene Bizad that roughly translates to, "Walk in beauty, even when the path is ugly." Our wedding day contained both ugliness and beauty, betrayal and loyalty, destruction and creation. But we chose, and continue to choose, to walk in beauty. The red wine stain was meant to be an ending. Instead, it became a beginning of a stronger marriage, a more authentic community, and a more resilient family tradition. For that unexpected gift, I can almost find gratitude. Almost. Isabella, thank you for sharing your story with us today. What you experienced was a profound betrayal from someone who should have been your strongest supporter, but your response reveals a powerful truth. When we prepare for possibilities and respond with strategic patience rather than emotional reaction, we reclaim our power. This isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring that truth comes to light in a way that honors your special day while holding betrayers accountable. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.